Glazing Basics.
Okay, welcome to the Glazing Center. I'm going to bring you guys with me on a journey to glaze my little pot that I've made and tell you all about the glazing process. In this center, you will find glazing paint palettes, glazing paintbrushes. These are the stroke and coat glazes. You'll also find some underglazes up here, as well as clear glaze. These stroke and coat glazes is what we're going to use most of the time when we're glazing our ceramic artwork after it's been bisque fired. These stroke and coat glazes have the color and the gloss, the melting agent, all in one. These glazing charts can be used for colors to see how they will turn out after they've been fired. So this one is the blues. So I can look on this chart and find the blues right here. And I know that that is what this color will turn out like once it's been fired. And these are mixable, so you can mix your own paint colors just like paints. Up here we have underglazes. So these are in a different container, and you can think of these as almost a two-step process. So underglazes just have the colors in them and no melting agent. So that's when we would use the underglaze first on our artwork to add color. And then if we wanted it glossy, we would add 2 to 3 layers of this clear glaze. This clear glaze is really interesting. It goes on pink, and it's just dyed pink so that you can see where you have painted it, but then when it gets fired, it actually fires clear. Today, I'm gonna need a paintbrush or two. Depending on the size of your artwork, you can choose a different size paintbrush. And there's also different types of paintbrushes in here. So there's a glazing paintbrush. These are the ones with really soft bristles. These are designed to hold the glaze and kind of lay them on top of your artwork. Over this type of paintbrush that is more of a traditional paintbrush. These will work as well for glazing small areas, but I would not use these traditional paintbrushes to cover large areas of your ceramic work. I'm also going to be taking a paint palette and then choosing a couple colors of glaze and taking them back to my spot. Okay, now I'm ready to start glazing. I have all my materials and I'm gonna start pouring out my glaze. So when I'm pouring out my glazes, I am only going to pour out about a quarter size dollop of glaze onto my paint palette. You can always pour out more, but then at the end of class, if you have a bunch of different colors of glaze on here, I'm in a big dollop like this, I'm going to ask you guys to actually take the cap off of these glaze bottles and use your paintbrush to actually scrape the paint back into the glaze bottle. The reason why we need to be so careful using these glazes is because they are very expensive. They're one of the most expensive materials that we have in the art room. So we really want to only use what we need and not be wasteful. And then at the end of class, clean off our paint palettes and put all of the extra glaze back into the glaze bottle. And I would also only recommend pouring out 1 or 2 colors at a time. I see this a lot. Students will pour out 10 different colors of glaze and then the bell rings for cleanup time, and it takes them like 10-15 minutes to scrape all of those glaze colors back into each individual jar. So I would just work with 1 or 2 colors at a time, and that will save you a lot of pain at the end of class during cleanup. So now I'm ready to glaze. I'm going to be glazing this artwork here, and I'm just going to pick up the glaze as it is. You do not need to add water to the glaze. It is designed to be applied in the thickness that it is. It's kind of thick and gloopy, more so than regular paint. Then I can just start painting and glazing, and we're just trying to do 2 to 3 even coats of this glaze. And I'm kind of just globbing the glaze onto the surface and trying to work in small areas so that then after I've kind of globbed it on, then I can spread it out into an even layer of glaze.
Now you can see me refilling my palette with a little bit more glaze.
Okay, now I've applied the first coat to the inside, and it's in a nice even layer. So I'm gonna let that dry and work on the outside.
It's always best to refill your palette as you're working instead of pouring lots of glaze out at one time.
Okay, now I have finished the first coat on the outside, so now I'm going to go back to the inside and do the second coat inside. Okay, and you can see that now with the second coat, it's kind of all a little bit more evenly distributed, and I can see that I've coated the entire piece on the inside. So now I'm going to do my second coat on the outside. And then I'm just going to try to use up the rest of the glaze that's on my palette here so that I don't actually have to go back and put it back into the container at the end of class. Okay, that looks good to me. Because I had planned to paint the bottom of this pot with a lighter color, if I mess up on this darker color blue glaze or any other darker color, and I want to put a light color glaze over top of this, I see this a lot with like eyes on characters. People mess up with the black and then they try to just cover it up with the white. It actually won't work, and this will show through this lighter color glaze once it's been fired. It kind of like emerges back through even if it looks like it's covered up all the way. So I actually have to take a damp sponge and remove that glaze anywhere that I messed up and I don't want that darker glaze showing through. And now I can go back and glaze with a lighter color because this is a nice clean surface. So I'm just gonna glaze the same way that I glaze the rest of my pot. I need to at least 2 layers of this, 2 to 3 layers of this pink to get nice even coverage. And I'm going to be really careful as I'm glazing not to glaze the bottom of my artwork, because when glaze gets fired in the kiln, our kiln goes up to like 2000 degrees. Anything that the glaze is touching, it will stick to. But the kiln shelves are also ceramic, so if there's glaze on the bottom of your artwork, it will stick to the kiln shelf and then ruin the kiln shelf and also probably your artwork. Okay, I finished the second coat of the pink and I actually messed up and I got a little glaze on the bottom. So before I put this into the kiln room to be fired, I need to make sure I clean all of that glaze off. So I'm gonna take, again, just a damp sponge, and then I'm going to just wipe off the surface of that clay. So I'm just gonna keep doing that until I see that all of that glaze is just wiped away. And I think this piece is good to go into the kiln to be fired.
Cleaning.
Okay, so now it's the end of class and I have a lot of glaze left on my palette, so I'm going to just take my paintbrush and actually scrape it back into the container. Just make sure it's the correct container so that they don't get contaminated. And then I'm gonna make sure that I screw the cap back on all the way. Okay, the glaze is just gonna go right back on the shelf. Please make sure that everything is fitting in here correctly and it's not spilling out of the cabinet.
When I'm cleaning my palette and brushes off, I usually use a low water pressure to keep the water from spraying all over the place. I use the brushes to scrub the palette off, and then I take time to clean the brushes again.
And now that my brushes are clean, I'm gonna put them brush side up so that it keeps the brushes nice, and then my paint palette goes back in to this paint palette bin, nice and clean. This is how the glaze center should look when you're done. All of the glazes should be nice and organized. Your paint palettes and brushes are washed off and put away correctly. Nothing is spilling out of the cabinet. All of the caps are closed. It looks great in here.
Now you can take your finished glazed piece and put it on the ready to be fired shelf on your class shelf in the kiln room, making sure you didn't glaze the bottom of your artwork.
Once your artwork has been glazed and fired, it will come out all glossy and shiny and beautiful, just like these examples.
Extra glazing tips.
Sometimes your artwork might have really deep textures in it. And this is when you want to use more of like a globbing effect when you're painting, and just trying to like glob the glaze into all of those nooks and crannies. If you just try to like paint like this, you can see how much little nooks and crannies that I'm missing. So using this kind of like globbing technique can be really helpful to get into all of those nooks and crannies when you're trying to glaze your artwork. So for artworks that don't have a bottom, like a lot of the rattles that we make actually don't have a bottom to them, we can actually glaze the entire piece all the way around. And then when we are firing it, we actually have these things called kiln stilts. And your artwork can sit on top of these stilts and not end up sticking to the kiln shelf because it's just raised up by these little kiln-proof wires. So this is the only exception to glazing the bottom of your artwork. Sometimes this happens. You get your artwork out and you find that a little piece has cracked off or fallen off. So in these cases, we cannot glue it together before it has been glazed fired because the glue will just burn away in the 2000 degree kiln. So what we need to do is just glaze these like normal separately, and then after the firing we can hot glue or super glue them back together depending on the size of the piece. And the only thing that I make sure is to not glaze these two little sections that will actually make contact together, because the glue sticks a lot better to this unglazed surface than a shiny glossy glazed surface.
The end. Thanks for watching.